Hello, welcome to an episode of Coffee and Propaganda. I am Duncan King, debuting the show on a new channel now. It just saves me a little space in the title of my videos. I don't have to write coffee and propaganda on every video from now on, so I can just write the title of it. Makes it look a little cleaner, a little easier to present on a search. Hope this doesn't confuse my 50 subscribers. And I hope that they come over to me with me to this other channel to watch my videos. In this episode, we're going to look at anti-atheist memes. So these are memes that people put out. They usually share them on Facebook that are supposed to express some kind of criticism of atheism. Doing this turned out to be a very difficult task, finding ones to comment on. So many of them made almost no sense. And the ones I could find that did make sense, about 90% of them were expressing the same thing of atheists are people that live in their mom's basement and argue on the internet all day. That it seemed to be like the same thing over and over again as far as expressing that. So I had to look for a while to find some diverse ones that express different things than just that. So we're going to look at some right now. The most common one will be the first one we'll look at. And this particular one, any atheist who's ever been in a discussion group at all has seen this one. And every time anyone shares it, any Christian shares it, they always act like they're the first person who ever shared it. And they always think it's really clever, even though we've seen it about 7 million times and we've debunked it just as many times. It's pretty silly and it doesn't make any real sense. It's not really criticizing atheist beliefs, but we'll go over it anyway because that's what the show's about. Going over propaganda, and this is propaganda. It's misinformation. The meme specifically says, atheism, the belief that there was nothing. Now, as far as that first sentence, I once put a poll out in an atheist group or a religion discussion group asking secularists if they believed that the universe literally began with nothing. And I underlined that word literally because nothing can be interpreted so many ways. And I got I think the poll result was about 70% said that no, they did not believe the universe began from nothing, and then 30% said they did. But then when I asked the ones who would respond to me that answered among the 30% that said the universe literally began from nothing, I asked them, what do you mean by nothing? Most of them commented about something like a quantum vacuum or quantum particles and things like that. I said, well, that's not nothing. I mean, a vacuum isn't nothing. So, how many atheists literally believe that the universe began from nothing, literally nothing, the way this meme is expressing it? I think it's a pretty small percentage. Now, I have heard some that do say this. For instance, there are some physicists who say that there couldn't have been anything before the Big Bang because there could not have been a moment before the Big Bang, and they explain it. They try to explain it. They say it's one of those things you have to understand mathematics. It's expressed through mathematics to kind of grasp it. I don't really quite understand it. I try to understand physics. I try to study it. It's one of those things that I just don't grasp myself. But I personally don't see why there would have to have been nothing. It doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't personally believe that the belief that there was first nothing. And according to polls that poll I put out there, and I got about 300 responses from atheists, the vast majority of them actually don't believe that there was first nothing. This is actually more in line with what Christians believe, that there was originally nothing and then God said, let there be light or whatever. So where did the God come from? They don't even try to explain it. He just, trying to start a universe from a God is ridiculous because God is supposed to be more awesome and more complex than the universe itself. So it's like it's not explaining anything. It's like trying to explain, as I often give the analogy, the existence of a pebble by saying it was shat there by a flying mountain, then not bothering to explain how the mountain could fly. So what I would say when you're saying when people say, "Well, do you believe that the universe began from nothing?" I think that it's a matter that we approach wrongly. We're putting our own kind of human slant on it, the way humans kind of see things versus space. Because we deal with tools, we deal with materials that exist in space, and then there's space around it. So we live in a world that has more space than things in it. And physicists will tell you, well, actually, space isn't even space. I mean, even when you're talking about the space between things, more often there's quantum particles in there. There's all kinds of actually things going on within the space between things. But what I ought to say, the analogy I'll bring up is momentum. So at one time it was believed, because people couldn't understand why when you slid something across that ice like a rock, why the rock would keep moving, why it would keep sliding, versus if you did the same thing on, say, a street, the rock would like go a couple inches, but if you did it on ice, it would slide and slide and slide. And for a millennium, philosophers couldn't figure out why that happened. They came up with all kinds of weird ideas. They came up with some kind of essence that was kind of generated between the rock and the ice that kind of hurled it forward or pulled it forward or whatever. It never made any sense. But the issue is that we were thinking of it wrongly. What didn't need to be explained is why the rock kept moving. What needs to be explained is why the rock would stop. So, because everything in motion stays in motion. We've come to understand this about physics and about objects. So, likewise, I think the same kind of mentality could be approached to things. What needs to be explained not is the existence of stuff, but what needs to be explained is the space between stuff. So the stance I would say is probably more practical to me is that there's always been stuff. What we need to explain is why there are space between particles, how they actually have anything between them. Because I would say the default, just like the default with something moving, would be it keeps moving. So likewise, the default of the universe is stuff. And you have to explain space. The Big Bang explains space, why there's space between stuff. There's a chemical reaction that sent them moving apart. And I obviously don't take the stance that first there was nothing. I take the stance that it makes more sense to me. Obviously, I don't understand the physics explanation of how that couldn't have been a moment before the Big Bang. I've had people try to explain that to me before. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying I don't understand it. So I personally take the stance that there have always been things, always been matter and energy in some form or another. So yeah, that's my stance. I don't take the stance that first there was nothing. And then nothing happened to nothing, so obviously I don't follow that either. And then nothing magically exploded for no reason. Well, there'll be a reason, obviously, when particles are coming together. And there's going to be chemical reactions, and there will be... Another thing that we'll often comment is the Big Bang was not an explosion. The Big Bang is it's really what's called, if you're using the term correctly for the Big Bang, it'd be the expanding universe model. The expanding universe model, there's actually more evidence for that than your own birth. Because looking through deep space telescopes, we can literally see back in time. If you notice, you look at the stars at night, you notice that they're all the same color. They all seem to be a yellowy, whitish color. But if you look into deep space, if you look at galaxies that are quite more distance that are thousands of light years away, or sometimes millions of light years away. The colors of those things are reddish to bluish. They're in some spectrum of red to blue. What they've calculated by looking at that, by looking at the red-blue spectrum, is that the only way you can get those colors is from movement. You're not actually seeing particles when you're looking at that. You're just looking at light itself. So the only way you can make that red-blue spectrum is by what's called red shift or blue shift, which means you're only going to get that because the object you're looking at, the galaxies, are moving away from your point of view, or they're moving toward your point of view. I think red means they're moving away, and blue means they're moving toward you. Might be mistaken about that. Red shift galaxies. Okay. And they give specific numbers to red shift and blue shift of objects in space. Okay. What is red shift and blue shift? Red shift and blue shift describes how light changes as objects in space, such as stars or galaxies, move closer or further away from us. The concept is key to charting the universe's expansion. Visible light is a spectrum of colors, which is clear to anyone who has looked at a rainbow. When an object moves away from us, the light is shifted to the red end of the spectrum as its wavelengths get longer. So when it moves away, it's toward the red end of the spectrum. When it moves closer, then it moves to the blue end of the spectrum as its wavelengths get shorter. So by looking at the red-blue shift of galaxies, what we've learned by kind of charting these out is that objects that are furthest away seem to be moving away faster than objects that are closer. So think of like an explosion. It wasn't an explosion, it's expansion. But think of an explosion. When an explosion happens, and let's see, it froze time right after an explosion happened. The furthest objects away would be obviously moving faster than the ones closer. And by charting all the galaxies that we can see in the deep field, we know for certain that those objects that are furthest away are moving faster than the objects closer. And if you scale back time, if you chart the speed they're moving and you try to move it back in time, you're going to come to the conclusion, a certain conclusion, that at one point in time, every single thing in the universe had to be at the same point in space and time. And that's where we get the idea of the expanding universe model, or what we call the Big Bang. This is a certainty. It isn't something debatable. It's not such an idea. What caused the expansion is a different issue. I explained, I think, to some extent why I think it could happen, but we know it happened. We know that at one point in time, every single thing in the universe had to be at one place. Looking to the deep field through telescopes, we know also, because when you're looking at an object in the deep field, when you're looking at something that's actually thousands of light years away or millions of light years away, you're actually looking at that as it was a million years ago. So the deep field telescopes are almost like a time portal, where we're literally looking into the past. And by doing this, so when I was saying that the Big Bang is more certain than your own birth, you actually can't look into a time portal and actually look at yourself being born. But we can look through these deep field telescopes at the universe as it actually was being born. We can actually look at what galaxies looked like millions of years ago, billions of years ago, through these telescopes, because we're literally seeing them as seeing the ones we see that are furthest away through the deep field telescopes. We're actually literally seeing galaxies as they existed billions of years ago. When you look at them as they existed billions of years ago, they're usually gaseous. They're not as formed. They don't have the spirals quite as much as the ones that are closer to us do, the ones that we're seeing more in our current state. So when you're seeing something in a deep field, you're actually not seeing it as it is now. You're seeing it as it was billions of years ago. And when you do that, you see more gaseous bodies than you do closer. So This is something we can observe firsthand. It's not like a speculative thing that we're guessing what it looked like back then. We can literally see through a telescope into the past. How galaxies looked in the past. So this is something that's more certain than your own birth, is what I'm saying. Nothing can really dispute what we're actually looking at. It's quite amazing how anybody would actually dispute the formation of the universe as found by science, or the Big Bang. Creating everything, and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason. Well, there's no reason. There's gravity. That's a reason. I mean, gravitational forces certainly exist. Chemical reactions certainly exist. I mean, if you look at the fact that stars create chemical reactions, actually create new materials in the stars, that's something we'd know for certain. Whatsoever into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs. Self-replicating bits would be, speaking of, I guess, the first self-replicating molecules. So that's a fair description, that they're self-replicating bits. We all believe that. I don't see the issue, which then turned into dinosaurs. But then again, when you're talking about evolution, you take the time out that it takes. It always sounds magical. For instance, if I said I got up right now and I went to my kitchen, you say, well, you just magically just went to your kitchen? No. I got up and I took a series of steps to get there. And the same thing goes when you try to criticize evolution. If you don't count the steps, all the tiny little steps that it took from a self-replicating bit to turn into a dinosaur, then you're not really criticizing evolution. You're talking about millions and millions of generations of the self-replicating. Half of evolution of life just took to create the cell itself. And if you really understand evolution, if you understand what it's actually claiming, all you really need is the time. If there's enough time, which we can prove that there is enough time, then there had to be the evolution on our planet that we have today. And of course, we have a lot of other evidence too, DNA, fossils, etc. And of course, it makes perfect sense. The only thing that they go over is that first there was nothing. We don't believe, very few atheists believe that there was nothing. Another one, okay, people should not impose their religious beliefs on others, which is why I use government to impose atheism on you. I don't know any atheist who advocates for the government imposing atheism on anyone. It's true that public schools teach evolution, because evolution is a scientific conclusion. But opposing atheism would be something like saying that it's unreasonable to believe in God or something like that. Or some kind of situation like the situation in the Twilight Zone episode I've seen. If you actually want to see what government imposing atheism would look like, look at an episode on Twilight Zone called, what was it called? The Obsolete Man. And it's a very good episode, one of my favorite episodes, but it's this guy, and he's got this huge desk, and then he brings a person forward who he's said to be opposite. Burgess Meredith is the star in it. He was a star in a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, but brings him forward for a council, and the guy says, the government has decided there is no God. Which, of course, the government hasn't done, and no atheist is asking the government to do. We want the government to stay out of religious matters, and declaring that there is no God would be a religious declaration. It would be talking against religion, which is actually what the First Amendment says you can't do. And we all advocate for the First Amendment. Now, of course, some people will say, atheists will say, well, atheism isn't a religion. Okay, of course, for the definition of atheist as we usually use it, no, it's not a religion. But according to the government, according to the legal definition of atheists, any stance about religious matters is religious. So if the government were to come forward and say that there is no God, or religions are false, or Christianity is false, that would be the government expressing a religious view. Or if a school did that, or if a person in the capacity as a government official were to use his office to say that, or if government land were being used to express the idea that gods don't exist, or Christianity's false, or Islam's false, or something like that. Atheists, if you know any of them, would be very much against this, and it's of course not happening. As far as evolution being a public school, evolution doesn't presuppose that there are no gods. It doesn't presuppose that religions are false or anything like that. It's just showing you that what the scientific information is suggesting. It's a science issue. You don't have to believe what scientific information is suggesting. It doesn't presuppose that when you take a science class that you're taking a vow of belief or a vow of compliance with what they're telling you. If this is just showing you, well, this is what we've proven. If you don't believe it, then you don't have to believe it. But it just use better science, try to come up with different conclusions if you want to. But anyway, there are a lot of Christians who believe in evolution also, and a lot of Muslims, a lot of other people, all kinds of faiths that believe in evolution. So evolution is not an atheistic stance. I think that's what they're trying to imply by this. So of course the meme is nonsense. I don't know any situation where atheists are advocating for the government to impose atheism on anybody. And it's kind of a weird complaint when you're talking about a country where they put in God you trust on money and make children get up every day and say that there's one nation under God. And yes, they do make children do that because children are required by law to go to get an education. And then, so whatever they're subjected to at school is something the government is subjecting them to do. And it's also government building. So what happens in a school is government doing it. It's a public school. To atheists, zoom in here, because it's got to be tough knowing after you die, you just disappear into nothing after living a life where everything you did was a waste of yours and everyone else's time. Okay, I'm sure that there are some atheists who spent their life wasting everybody's time. I don't know if they're wasting their own time, because I'm sure people enjoy their lives and make the best of their own lives as far as themselves go. But I would hope that we don't waste everybody's time. I don't know if this is just a criticism of atheists just saying we're worthless and we don't do anything important. You can go to lists up the wazoo of great atheist philanthropists, people who have done important, amazing things with their lives that are atheists. The percentage is a little higher, I think, than it is with Christians, atheists who have done great philanthropy and things like that. But it's not, I don't think the difference is so great that we could say that atheists do great things with their lives and Christians don't. But certainly plenty of atheists have. Maybe a little bit more percentage-wise than Christians. But I guess this is just a way to go against, criticize the specific atheists on the internet that whoever made this meme encounters. The Atheist Convention. Atheist Convention. This is one I've encountered almost as much as the Makes Perfect Sense one. And it says, Atheist Convention, what proof do we have there is a dog? This one, whenever you see anyone put together a parallel example, it's a way to put on display their own logical abilities. When I think of this one, I think of a person that just has very little sense of logic. What are they saying the dog is here? What I'm curious about. Is the dog supposed to be comparable to God? Do we live on God? It doesn't really make much sense here. I would guess that the dog would be the earth. I mean, the fleas live on the dog, so we live on the earth. That would be the parallel there, not the God. We don't live on a God. We live on a planet. So, yeah, I'm not really grasping. It's one of those situations where when somebody, yeah, obviously, when people come up with a parallel example of this is putting their intellect on display. Because so many logical deductions require us to come up with parallel examples. This is like that, or this is to that, is this is to that, or X is to Y as Z is to Y. And you find those kind of questions, for instance, on IQ tests have a lot of questions like that. So it's a good way to put on display someone's intellect. So according to this person, flea is to dog as person is to God. That doesn't really work. Flea would be to dog as person is to earth. So I don't see how that really it doesn't make any sense to me. And obviously, are they trying to say that invisible, undetectable super beings are as obviously exist as the dog would be that the fleas are on it? That's pretty ridiculous. That's pretty bad of a reach to say that it's just so obvious that ghosts and spirits and angels exist that it's like believing like the fleas not knowing they live on the dog. But regardless, the parallel will be the people living on the earth, and obviously we know the earth exists. And we've learned this through scientific study. We're not going to learn it from any book, any shitty book that was written by sheep herders 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. Atheism. Believing that you can get away with it, it must be okay. It must me okay? Okay. Believing that if you can get away with it, it must me okay. When people take the time to put this meme together, he's sitting there taking the time to put this together, can't even spell it correctly. That's showing the attention to detail this person has, which obviously having a poor attention to detail is going to cause him to have a lot of misconceptions about reality. But yeah, so this, like the previous meme where they're trying to draw a horrible parallel example here that doesn't work. This person's misuse or misspelling here of the meme that he sat and made shows his inability, his lack of ability to pay attention to detail when he can't even write the first sentence right. But anyway, believing that if you can get away with it, it must be okay. Me okay, but he meant be okay. That includes rape, robbery, murder, torture, pedophilia, tax evasion, racketeering, theft, arson, embezzlement, drug distribution, kidnapping, lying, cheating, etc. Unfortunately, atheists don't draw the line at other atheists as they are fair game too. Okay, I guess what they unfortunately, atheists don't draw the line at other atheists as they are fair game too, since there is no ultimate moral authority that will make you account for your misdeeds. Then there, THEIR, we're supposed to be the THERE, truly is no justice. Isn't it wonderful? Well, we have an internal sense of compassion, sir. I don't know how hard that is for you to grasp. Maybe you don't have it. But if you're trying to explain why people would want to not murder, rape, torture people, why aren't you trying to ask me why anyone would want to do that? If do you need an ultimate authority to tell you that raping or robbing or murdering is fun? No, you don't have to have an ultimate authority to tell you those things are fun, because wanting to do them to some extent with some people, you can understand, is an internal drive based on internal drives that their mind already has. Likewise, we have internal compassion. We have an internal sense of compassion, which is built into the human mind. And so that's why we wouldn't want to do those things, even if we could get away with them. Statistically, atheists are less likely to go to prison, In countries with large atheist populations, those countries have lower crime rates than most countries with large religious populations. So what they're talking about just simply isn't true. It's based on hypothetical Christian beliefs that when you apply them to reality are false, just like most Christian beliefs about how the world works. And there goes that. So that's a shitty one. Well, they're all shitty, but atheists don't believe in the Bible because it was written by man. Tell me again who wrote all their textbooks. There it is. Atheists don't believe in the Bible because it's written by man. Tell me again who wrote all their textbooks. Man wrote our textbooks, but textbooks are pointing to information that anyone can look up themselves. Pointing to studies too that anybody can conduct themselves. So the textbook isn't just telling you to believe this because it's in the textbook, whereas the Bible is telling you to believe this because it's in the Bible. It's telling you to believe it because a God inspired it. So if it was written by man, then that disproves it. Whereas a textbook, if it was written by man, that doesn't disprove it because it's just pointing to information that you can look for yourself. It's a totally different situation. And again, it's another situation where a person's trying to put together a parallel example, which doesn't work, which shows how little their intellect functions. The Bible written by man would disprove the Bible because the Bible is only authoritative if it was written by a God. Textbooks are authoritative because they point to actual information that we can see ourselves. They're compilations of information. The Bible doesn't point to any information that we can look at ourselves. We're supposed to believe it because it's authoritative. It comes from a divine being. It's inspired by a divine being. So written by man would disprove the Bible. Written by man would not disprove a textbook. Only if the textbook was actually giving false information would it disprove it. Doesn't want religious beliefs on money, writes own beliefs on everyone's money. This one is almost a fair criticism. Of course, e pluribus unum, which is what this is showing here, is what the motto of our country used to be. E pluribus unum. So is that really his belief? Writing it on money, that used to be the motto of our country. And I don't even see that very well. The person took a little machine here, crossed out "In God We Trust" or "E pluribus unum." I used to do this with money too, but I used to write "Eat your veggies." I felt that was a much. If you're going to write anything on money, I think that should be the best one to write there. "Eat your veggies." So it was a positive thing to write on the money. So I would cross out "In God We Trust" and I write "Eat your veggies." But anyway, often we do that. A lot of times sometimes some more ambitious atheists will write "There is no God" on the money. It's protest sort of activity. Do they really think that all the money should say there is no God on it when they do that? No, I don't think that they really do. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make you feel how you make them feel with your intolerance, with your dominionism. So what if atheists were dominionistic? What if atheists put something on money, some message on money? That's why they do that. How would you feel? So a lot of times, like the protests, a lot of times when they take, for instance, in our local town, they had a nativity scene on public land in Sheboygan, Michigan, which is nearby here. I used to live there for a long time. And they had a nativity scene on public land, so the Freedom of Religion Foundation said, okay, well, if you're going to put that there, then we're going to put a sign up there saying that there is no God on your government land. Do they actually believe that a sign like that should be on government land? No. They're just they were putting it up there to try to show people what their nativity scene basically is an expression of. If you're going to allow that kind of expression, then we should be allowed to express these other things saying that there's no God. It doesn't mean that they actually believe that they should be able to do that. They're just showing the absurdity of letting the Christians use government land to promote Christianity by having a nativity scene there. So if you want to have that kind of world, then we obviously would have a world where our money tells you that there is no God, and you should be perfectly fine with that if you're just saying, well, it's just, put it on the money, don't make any difference. Makes no difference to you to have in God we trust on the money, then it should make no difference to you if we write there is no God on the money. And of course, atheists in general would not be for that. We don't actually believe that the money should be used to express political or religious beliefs. That's just not what money's for. I mean, or the government's for. Government is supposed to be neutral on such matters. Another one, Liberal Logic 101. You can believe what you want, just keep it to yourself. And the Christian says, seriously, that's what you believe? Absolutely. Then why aren't you keeping it to yourself? Well, again, this is our situation where, because most atheists we know, or most atheist Christians know, are ones they encounter on the internet. So they have this kind of perception that all atheists are on the internet, or the way you're encountering an atheist on the internet is the same thing as when you encounter them in real life. If you're in a discussion group about religion or something like that, the atheist is talking to what's called an unsolicited audience, which means a solicited audience, which means that people go into the group to discuss religion. They know why they're there. That's different from an unsolicited audience. It's not the same thing as just knocking on your door and saying, do you believe in God? Atheists never do this. In fact, the only time I know of any atheists ever doing this, it was done as a kind of a joke to try to see how people react. And the reactions were so extreme, I was scared for the guy. So atheists don't walk around to Christians on the street and ask them, hey, what do you believe? And then if they believe in God or they believe in Jesus, start ridiculing them. We don't do what you do. This is you're criticizing people on the internet doing it, usually in religious discussion groups, where that's the purpose of the discussion group. And it's also variability heuristic, which means because all the atheists you don't really hardly know any in real life. Most Christians don't. The only ones you're encountering are on the internet. So you think all atheists sit on the internet all day, when actually very few do. If you ever go out and try to outreach and try to meet some atheists, like go to a local atheist group, there's usually one in most hometowns. You can go on Meetup and try to find one. Most of those people are not online all the time. Most of them are they don't walk around arguing with Christians. It's actually kind of rare. So, another bullshit meme. Atheists don't sit around arguing with people all the time. And those who do are doing it on the internet. They're a solicited audience, so that they're people that come there to talk about religion. It's not the same thing as knocking on your door or running to you on the street and bothering you. Not to say that I have some kind of issue with Christians doing that as far as their right to do it. Christians have a right to knock on your door and ask you if you believe in God, and if you don't want them to do it, put a sign on your door that says no solicitation. And tell them not to do it, tell them not to bother you anymore. And if you don't want people on the street bothering you, tell them, hey, leave me alone. Whatever. People have a right to preach on the street if they want to. It's perfectly fine with me. What we don't want them doing, legally being allowed to do, is using the government to do that. Because by the government doing this, you are forcing me to promote your religion through tax dollars, because I have to pay taxes legally. So that is going against my religious freedom. My money, you're taking money away from me through the tax dollars and using that to promote freedom, promote religion, by having a government official whose salary I pay for and represents me as well as represents you, is using his office to promote Christianity. So we don't want the government doing this. And I don't know why that's so hard for Christians to grasp. We just don't want the government. You don't use the government. We're fine with you doing it in public or promoting Christianity, using your own money, your own resources, your own land to promote Christianity. You can do that all you want. We just don't want you using the government to do it. And I know almost no atheists are going door to door and bothering people or confronting people on the street about what they believe and then ridiculing them if they don't believe in if they believe in God or something like that. Say Christmas is about getting stuff and no one bats an eye, but everyone say it's about Jesus and everyone loses their minds. I don't know if they're losing their minds. It's probably just another situation where you're using government land to talk about the true meaning of Christmas or something like that, which is a violation of the Establishment Clause. Again, you can't use the government to promote Christianity or promote religion. Government has to be neutral on such matters. But Christmas in general, I don't have an issue with that. I mean, there's some atheists that say that you can't even say, they're against people even saying Christmas, period, because it has the word Christ in it. And so they're saying, well, just saying Christmas or Merry Christmas promotes Jesus. Personally, I don't take that stance. Christmas is a secularized holiday. If somebody says Merry Christmas to me, I don't think that they're actually encouraging me to do something religious when they say that, because most people, when they think of Christmas, they think of twinkle lights and presents and stuff like that. So when somebody says Merry Christmas, I think that's fine for people on government land to do that. They just can't say things like the true meaning of Christmas or have a nativity scene, because then they're using the government to promote Christianity. And of course, private citizens can talk about Christmas all they want. Hobby Lobby can do it all they want. Hobby Lobby is a privately owned business. They can't put it so much in front of their employees that it makes it a difficult environment for employees who don't believe as they do to work there. That is a different matter. But if the owner of Hobby Lobby believes in Jesus and he wants to sell a bunch of Jesus stuff, that's his affair. Or sell a bunch of nativity scenes or things like that, then that's fine. We went through all these pretty quickly. Now let's go to a response I had to my last video. My last video was about Bart Ehrman and William Lane Craig and the New Testament. And I got a response. Just so everybody knows, if you give any kind of response to any video I give a comment, if it's a serious comment really about the topic, where you're trying to raise a point or ask a question that leads to a point of some kind, or even if it's a critical question, as long as it's serious and generally sincere and generally about what I'm talking about, I will feature on the show and respond to it live on the show. And someone kind of did that with my last video, though kind of shittily, but we'll get to that in a second. His name is David Wilcott. He said, your video is wrong within the first few minutes when you claimed that Ehrman argues that the Gospels are entirely not what happened. Ehrman viciously defends the crucifixion of Jesus, the existence of Jesus, and the majority textual reliability of the texts. If I am not mistaken, he also defends the identities of the 12 disciples and the gospel testimony of Paul. Guys, Paul didn't write Gospels. I don't know what the hell that means. Let me show you what I actually said. My issue with David Wilcock here, I like criticisms. If you're going to give me a criticism, it should be fair, though. And it should be actually something that you actually watch the video closely. And so what we have here, this is an atheist saying this, and he's actually an individual who apparently just likes to listen to himself talk and doesn't like to pay attention to what other people say very much. Show how he's actually not really paying attention much here. He didn't watch my whole video. He just watched like a minute of it and then was looking for something to argue about, and he found something in a minute. And even then, in that instance, he really wasn't even paying attention. This is what I actually said. What he's saying I said here, again, is that Ehrman argues that the Gospels are entirely not what happened. Here's what I actually said. Ehrman has made public through many books the consensus of New Testament scholars that the New Testament is not a historical document, or it doesn't have historical documents. And the Gospels are not a historical record of anything that occurred. So that's why I said the Gospels are not a historical record of what occurred. I did not say that Ehrman's stance is that the Gospels are not what happened. Obviously, in any record, you're going to have some things that actually happen. For instance, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter contains some things that actually happened. Abraham Lincoln was actually president of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was actually, had the Gettysburg Address, actually was leading the North to free the slaves, and Abraham Lincoln actually founded the amendment, that Emancipation Proclamation, all that kind of stuff. But Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is not a historical record of anything. And that's what I specifically said. I said the Ehrman stance is that the Gospels are not a historical record. Ehrman does believe some things. He believes, for instance, that some of the things you're saying are false. He does not believe that the majority reliability, textual reliability of the text, well, that's something I actually brought up in the video, and I did say that he believes that about 99% of the texts are authentic. You didn't even get to that point because you weren't actually interested in actually watching my video, David Wilcott. You're just a person who likes to hear yourself talk, and you're not interested in learning anything, and that's a mark of a person who will never have wisdom. If you're not actually interested in listening to anybody else, you just want to hear yourself. He defends the crucifixion of Jesus. Okay, because the Gospels say that Jesus was crucified doesn't mean that the portrayal of that in the Gospels is a historical portrayal, or that is a historical record of anything. The fact that Jesus existed doesn't mean that the Jesus, because the Gospels say Jesus existed, and Ehrman says Jesus existed, doesn't mean that he thinks that the Gospels are a historical record. What I said was specifically that Ehrman's stance is that the Gospels are not a historical record. Now, as far as the identities of the 12 disciples, well, we think that there were 12 disciples, but not because of the Gospels say it. We say it because Paul said that. He said the 12 disciples. Now, as far as who they were, I don't think Ehrman takes the stance that the list of 12 in the Gospels are actually who the 12 were. We know that Paul mentions 12 disciples, and we know from the word disciple that means people that will follow Jesus around. Of course, the Gospel authors read Paul. So the Gospel authors got that information that there were 12 disciples from Paul, and then made up names. Some of the names are actually names Paul gave of apostles. We don't know if the apostles Paul mentioned knew Jesus in life other than James, the brother of Jesus. But as far as the actual story in there being historical from the Gospels, no, Ehrman does not take that stance. And as I pointed out to this individual, I am not wrong about this, or wrong about really anything I say. I don't say things if I don't know what I'm talking about. Here is Ehrman's specific stance on that matter, and Ehrman's blog. So this is Ehrman actually writing here. Question about the eyewitness and the eyewitnesses in the Gospels. Please note, normally I will be addressing questions that I receive in the members-only site, Bart answers his readers. But occasionally I'll post a question and answer here in the public forum to give a sense to everyone what sort of things are available for anyone willing to give a bit of charity and enjoying the site. The question here is, one of the major points in your work, if I understand correctly, is that the contents of the New Testament are at a vast remove in time, place, and source from any eyewitness account of Jesus' life. When I consider this point in my ignorance, and simply from the perspective of chronology, from the time of Jesus to the accounts of the earliest Gospels, it seems to me that at least one very old eyewitness of Jesus' life might have been able to report a significant amount of information about Jesus and his teachings directly to, say, Mark. In view of this, I wonder how scholars know that no New Testament account of Jesus could have been received directly from any eyewitness. Bart's response: it is a very good question, and one that I get asked in a variety of ways, a lot. My view is this: When Mark was writing his gospel, the first to be written in, say, 65 to 70 CE, there probably were indeed people still living, who were familiar with Jesus. At least I would assume that Mark himself thought so. This means the author of Mark. This doesn't mean the actual person that Christians believe wrote the gospel. Otherwise, it is hard to explain why he included what is now Mark 9:1, where Jesus tells the disciples, "Truly I tell you, some of you standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come in power." If everyone from the first generation had already died, then it seems implausible that Mark would leave a saying of Jesus indicating that the end would come before they all died. I do not, by the way, think that Mark's Jesus was referring to the day of Pentecost, the coming of the church, or even to his own transfiguration, as some interpreters claim, in order to get around the fact that Jesus declared that the end would come before all the disciples died, when in fact it did not. But on to my point. Even though there may well have been eyewitnesses alive some 35 to 40 years after Jesus' death, there is no guarantee, or I would argue no reason to think, that any of them were consulted by the authors of the Gospels in writing their accounts. The eyewitnesses would have been Aramaic-speaking peasants, almost entirely from rural Galilee. Mark was a highly educated Greek-speaking Christian living in the urban area outside of Palestine, Rome, who never traveled, probably to Galilee. So the existence of eyewitnesses would not have much, if any, effect on his gospel. So the existence of eyewitnesses would not have much, if any, effect on his gospel. The same is true even more so with the later Gospels. Luke begins his Gospel by saying that the eyewitness is starting passing along the oral traditions he had heard. Luke 1:1-4. But he never indicates that he had ever talked to one. He has simply heard stories that had been around from the days of the eyewitnesses, and if the standard dating of his Gospel and Matthew's is correct, they were writing about 50 years or more after Jesus' death. John's Gospel was even later. My sense is that most of the eyewitnesses, and who knows how many there were, hundreds, probably not, dozens, had died before the Gospels were written. Those that survived were carrying on their lives in rural Galilee or Jerusalem, and the Gospel writers, who never say they consulted any of them, probably never did consult with any of them. The Gospels are based on oral traditions that have been in circulation and changed as a result for decades before the Gospel writers had even heard them. And as anyone knows who has been subject to oral traditions, this will include all of us, the stories told about a person can change absolutely overnight. It happens all the time. What happens then to stories in circulation for 40 or 50 years in different countries, told in different languages among people who never laid eyes on an eyewitness or on anyone else who had? My sense is that the stories get changed, often a lot, and many of the stories simply get made up. It's just the way it happens. And it can be shown to have happened with the Gospels, since the same story is often told in very different ways. Every historian will tell you evidence matters. Back to my comment. This is what I said. Come out of the woodwork and tried to discredit him, show that he's not a serious scholar and all this kind of stuff. Berman's made public through many books the consensus of New Testament scholars that the New Testament is not a historical document, or it doesn't have historical documents, and the Gospels are not a historical record of anything that occurred. Again, it's not a historical record of anything that occurred. Your video is wrong within the first minutes when you claim the Arabian arguments of the Gospels are entirely not what happened. That is not what I said. I said that they're not a historical record. Totally different. So again, pay attention to what people say, and of course, an inability to pay attention during a minute and a half into a video where that's all you watched probably shows that you deal with evidence this way. You don't pay close attention to things. I choose my words very carefully. And so if you want to respond to something I say, actually listen to it and actually look at what I actually said. Sometimes I misspeak because I'm not very good at this sort of thing. My verbal skills are not great, which is kind of the reason I have this show. I'm trying to include my oral abilities, and I enjoy doing the show. That's why I do it, even though I don't have very many viewers, which is perfectly fine. You gotta start somewhere. And if I don't get a lot of viewers, that's okay. I do the show because I enjoy it. If you want to do anything creative, you should enjoy doing it. And that's why I do the show. But anyway, if anyone you make a comment to my video, I promise I don't rip them up like I did that guy every time. He didn't watch the video. He didn't know, he was misquoting me, and he was wrong and I was right, and that's just how it went. So I'm not going to be totally brutal with you to everyone like I was with this guy just because you comment. I mean, feel free to comment, and I will, if it's a good question, a good serious comment, or a critique of something I said, I'll always include it, give it this fair shake, including that guy, which I did. I was very fair. So anyway, if you want to see more of this, whatever this is, subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.